Hello, friends. Welcome to Heidi's Colorful Colorado. I'm your host, Heidi Ganal, a wife, mom of four, CU Regent, and the founder of Camp Bow Wow and the She Factor. With a passion for keeping the spirit of our state alive and well, I started this podcast to bring the people of Colorado together to celebrate the amazing state we call home. Come along on this journey with me as I travel across our old country roads in my vintage RV, interviewing folks that embody the true spirit of the Rocky Mountains. From the Front Range to the mile-high city to the wild west of southern Colorado, we'll celebrate the history, beauty, and Coloradans that make this place the colorful state it is. Each week, you'll meet people trailblazing the way for an even more colorful future for us all, making a huge difference along the way. Are you ready for a Rocky Mountain ride? Let's do this, Colorado. So excited to have you here today. We have a wonderful guest, Holly Wilson, who's the founder and Chief Empowerment Officer of Women's Recovery Center. It's definitely an important topic since COVID hit. We're all trying to feel better in our own ways, and I think Holly might be a great guest to help us guide and walk through how we're surviving these days. So Holly, welcome. And I know you're a CU buff too, so that's an added bonus.
Yes, go Buffs. Are you a buff too?
I am. I'm a regent at the University of Colorado, and I went to see you. And I'd like to tell people I bleed black and gold. So
yes, go Buffs. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me, Heidi. I'm really excited to take part of your amazing podcast. I got to have a listen to a few of the episodes, and thanks for representing Colorado.
Of course. You know, we have such an amazing state. And one of the things I think that I've noticed as in my role as a regent is this divide that we're seeing in society right now and in Colorado. You know, how do you reconnect people? And I think one of the best ways to reconnect people is through stories and hearing people's stories and humanizing people and humanizing businesses so that we know who's behind the scenes, you know, at our local restaurant or at our local nonprofit. And you're doing incredible work at the Recovery Center. So I'd love to start out by talking a little bit about your, you know, where you grew up. I know you grew up in Crested, Butte, but what's your journey there? Like, how do you connect to Colorado from that perspective?
Oh man. Well, I feel like growing up in Crested Butte, it gives you a taste of like some quintessential Colorado life. Being raised in a ski town, I always tell people when I was growing up, we got out of school half day every day and got to go up skiing on the mountain. And people are just like, oh man, that sounds like the most Colorado thing I've ever heard of. You know, like people can't even fathom that experience.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it has changed a lot, I feel like, since I was growing up. But, you know, I love Colorado so much. I feel like it's such a good energy in this state.
It is. And, you know, what part of what we're trying to do here is connect people to the essence of Colorado, or what we think is the spirit of Colorado, that rugged individualism. And Crested Butte is like the perfect example of a just down and dirty Colorado town. It's what it's all about. It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Full of hippies, too. At least when I was growing up, I think it's changed a little bit. Lots of people have moved there as well. I think like my graduating class in high school for the public school was 23 kids. And I think they're like at least 5 times over that now. So.
Yeah, especially now with the difference in the Front Range, the metro area, how much it's becoming very cosmopolitan, and you've got the rural areas of Colorado that are still very much, you know, like it used to be years ago. And you know, people are a lot different in both of those perspectives, but I think we all appreciate our state and love all it has to offer. And one of the things that I'd love to hear a little bit more about is your journey to getting to the metro area and kind of moving this direction. Was it through CU or going to CU that got you to Denver?
Yes. Yeah. I actually applied to a bunch of schools, and I don't know if anybody else can relate, but growing up in a very small mountain town, I was just like, I just need to get out of here. But I ended up getting a full ride to CU. And so I got the Governor's Opportunity Scholarship. And so I was really grateful, and I couldn't pass up that opportunity. And I was so glad because going to school in Boulder was obviously one of the coolest experiences of my life. And I love Boulder. I love being a buff. I changed my major like 6 times and ended up studying film. And then right after college, moved out to LA and lived in LA and New York and Utah, and ultimately just ended up wanting to come back here. I love Colorado so much. I did shortly after college to have a little stint living in downtown Denver. And that was like a 2008, 2007, 2008. And let me tell you, that was like just when they redid like all that downtown area by Commons Park, you know? And I lived in the Commons Park West apartments right after they were built. And it was just like Denver finally felt safe. I don't know if you can recall, but when I was a kid, it was like kind of scary to go downtown Denver.
We were talking the other day about, do you remember the place Polyesters? You're probably too young, but there was a club, like a dance club, and it was right where Coors Field was. And you'd be terrified to walk down those streets, and it was very undeveloped. And but we all did it. It was an 18 and over club, and we loved it and had a great time. But it's so like sophisticated now, and there's so many neat places to eat and go, just hang out. And it's a totally different scene from when we were all, young and growing up in Colorado, but it's fantastic.
Oh, I love it. I'm so glad we've gotten that nice facelift downtown because I mean, when I was, fresh out of college, hanging out downtown Denver, it was one of the best times of my life. So cool there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think going to CU Buff games and then moving that into Denver has been kind of a funky experience. It's like, no, I want it in Folsom, or I want the old school CU games from, when we were all young. But it is really neat to have that vibe and be at the Broncos Stadium and celebrating the Buffs at the same time. And just that connection to kind of the big major markets and playing football there. But do you like CU football? Do you go to the games?
Oh yeah, I love it. I go to the games, Broncos. I remember going to like one of the very first Rockies games when I was a kid, back when like Don Baylor was there and Dante Bichette. And, I'm a big Colorado sports gal. Like pretty much any Colorado sporting event is one of my favorite things to do. That's why I'm so excited for them to open back up. But that was a big motivation for me to move back here when I found out I was having my son. I just love that experience here for me as a kid, and I wanted him to be able to have that too.
How old's your little one?
He's 5. He's in kindergarten. And, I lived in LA and New York, and then I lived in Utah and Salt Lake City. And so I kind of got all these really different types of cultures and experiences, and they were all wonderful. But ultimately, it was when I was pregnant with him, I was like, my kid's got to be a Colorado kid. Like, I just think there's something about Colorado where I think we just have a good balance in our culture. Like we have great food and we respect a lot of different types of cultures and embrace them. I think it's just a place that embodies the values that I would like to have for my child.
That's something I talk to people on the podcast about, is like, what does the spirit of Colorado mean to you? And I think you just answered it, but we do have a different way of life here. It's kind of the wild, wild west in some ways. Like, get out there, start your own business, live whatever lifestyle you want to live. It's very accepting of, just that kind of live and let live. I think that's kind of a mantra for Colorado and our community here.
Yeah, that's how I always felt. I mean, people will always make fun of me and have always made fun of me as an adult because, and I don't know if this is every Coloradan, but growing up in Crested, Butte, you just wave at everybody. And so like I walk down, the walking path out by my house, and I always say hello to everybody, and like all the kids walking to school every day. And if I'm driving in my car, I wave when people pass. And I know that sounds really crazy, but obviously like having lived in different cities, you say hi to somebody's kid and they're like, oh my God, why is this person talking to my kid?
Weirdo.
It's like we're friendly, and we're also like, we'll help our neighbor, and it won't be about like what your values are. That's kind of what what being a Coloradan always felt like to me is like, we care about each other. It's not as judging as some of the other places where I've been, and you don't have to like have the same values as a family to be kind to your neighbor and want to be in touch with your community. And I feel like that it's a place where we respect each other and we lift each other up, and we are very inclusive, as you said, as a state. And those are the most important values to me in my family.
So Holly, let's dig into how you ended up launching the Women's Recovery Center and your own journey with alcohol. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I got sober in 2011 in June. And I learned a lot about myself. I went to treatment, and I was a very high functioning alcoholic. I held my job. I was able to get a lot accomplished. I don't think I really, was what a lot of people think of when you talk to them about an alcoholic. When I say that to people, they kind of give me the shocked look like, I wouldn't have expected that from you, but I didn't lose a lot or have a lot of really intense consequences in my life. I just wasn't really very happy with myself and my relationships, and I had been causing some harm to people that I cared about. And so I made a decision. Eventually, it took me a little bit to kind of identify that alcohol was a contributing factor. But at last, I was like, hey, I think alcohol is really the thing that's lighting the match here in this catastrophe. So I decided to get treatment, and I went to an inpatient treatment center in Utah. And then I just started to learn so much. And obviously, one of the things that I learned is that alcohol was really the symptom for me, and that the issues were a lot deeper. And that really I was using alcohol to kind of self-medicate and cope with some of the stressors that I was experiencing and trauma that I had experienced earlier in my life. So I'm glad that I was led to that understanding by means of the alcohol. And then, of course, I got so much help in such a short period amount of time. I just felt better. I approached life in a way that I liked a lot better. And so I decided that I wanted to give back, and I started working in treatment. I guess I should rewind a little bit. When I was finishing inpatient treatment in Utah, they had asked me, my case manager said, what's your plan? What are you going to do next? And I said, well, I'm going to move home to Colorado where all my friends and my family are. And they were like, this work isn't done for you. And so what we're going to recommend is that you stay here and stay in treatment and continue to do this work and live in sober living. And I'm like, what? I don't even know what all this is. And I have to do more. I just did 60 days of inpatient treatment and I have to keep doing work. And they were like, well, they don't really have any of that kind of support in Colorado, but they had a ton of it in Utah. So from that moment, that was kind of the first moment when I was like, oh, well, one day I need to, bring to Colorado this awesome resource. And then I went through sober living, and I went through what they had called aftercare in their facility. And then kind of from the time I started working in treatment, I was doing it with the goal in mind of bringing that kind of support to Colorado. And, fast forward to 2016, when I started opening up, several outpatient programs had opened up in the area, but none of them particularly focused on women, which I'm a big believer in gender-specific treatment. So I just kind of bit the bullet and opened up my own outpatient treatment program for women with sober living.
Holly, what was the biggest challenge you faced when you opened your business? Because you're kind of a unicorn. There are not a lot of women leaders in this space. And that's my other life that I do with She Factor, but I'm really intrigued by that.
Oh man, I can't believe I have to list just one challenge. Well, I can say that I had always kind of wanted to do this, and I put that out there, and I was working in like a kind of an outreach capacity for a psychiatric hospital here in Colorado at the time. And I started I was doing it very intentionally. I had kind of built some pieces along the way of knowing what I wanted to do. And I was in graduate school for counseling. So I had been the administrator at a program in Utah. And then I was in graduate school for the clinical, and I was working in a job for outreach. So in my mind, that kind of covered the 3 pillars of what I would need to know, or at least have a good foundation on, in order to operate a successful business. And that's when I kind of mentioned it to somebody who was the owner and CEO of another treatment center. And I just said, well, this is what I want to do one day. And he was the one that was like, well, why don't you just do it now? And I was like, so at the time I had a 1-year-old son, and I was in graduate school still, online graduate school. And so I was like, yeah, I was planning on doing this like after, my son's a little older and more self-sufficient, after I graduate from grad school. So I think honestly, that was the hardest part, is that if I hadn't just been like committed and went for it, I don't know that I ever would have done it. So just making the decision to go for it was the hardest piece. And then once I was in, I was fully in. And certainly I would never lie and say that it's easy. In fact, I would tell everybody it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it was also totally worth it. And I would encourage more people to go to business, go work for themselves.
That's interesting. I tell young people that all the time. I'm like, if you're going to do anything, just try starting a business. You may hate it or you may absolutely love it. You got to figure out if you have that bug at some point, but try and do that early on so that you don't waste a lot of time trying to fit a circle into a square, working for a corporation or doing something in a cubicle all day when you're really meant to be an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of us entrepreneurs, it's almost like it's like being an artist. It's a creative outlet, and it's a way to solve problems for people. And boy, are you solving a problem for people right now, especially women. I mean, COVID has really turned up the stress dials, right? Especially for working moms. How, or what are you hearing out in the community? Is alcohol a bigger issue now, or is it just kind of the same level? Like, what's going on right now?
Oh, it's definitely a bigger issue now. And I know we joked about this before we started, but I have actually had many of my friends calling me genuinely concerned, saying, I'm drinking more now than I've ever been drinking in my life. I'm drinking every day. Like, is this okay? Like they want my permission. And I'm like, well, I'm your friend, so I'm going to have to talk to you in a friend capacity. And I can tell you, here's a good resource if you want to investigate this. Because I do think that's important, is that it's hard for somebody to get help. They really have to know for themselves what they want. But I do think that drinking is a socially accepted coping skill that a lot of people turn to, and it does provide temporary relief. What I can say to people is that it's good to always be mindful and have other coping skills, especially coping skills that are going to provide some long-term solution. So if you do find yourself using that as your one coping skill and your one outlet, then that might be a good time to examine your relationship with alcohol. My friends that called me, I told them, why don't you try to switch to a cup of tea every night and see how you feel about having a cup of tea. And if you can't not drink, that might be a good indicator that something else is going on that's a little bit deeper. But for a lot of people, it is oftentimes about that ritual and sitting down and taking time for themselves, like after, especially if you're like a homeschool mom all day and trying to manage your job, and then you're just like, I just need some me time. And oftentimes you just habitually will go to having a glass of wine with that or whatnot. And so if you can switch it up, just try that.
That's a really good tip. Is there anything that, like a tipping point or some question? I know you kind of hinted at this, like try the tea, but how do you know it's a problem? The alcohol in your life is a problem. Is it because it's affecting other people or your life, or where's that tipping point? No pun intended, but
yeah, that's tough because it's different for everybody. I mean, we have some basic assessments that we like to use. And ultimately, the MAST is one that we use that's pretty general, of like, Have you ever annoyed anybody? So that would go to the relational people. Have you ever annoyed anybody with your drinking? Has anybody ever criticized you about your drinking? So that's kind of external stuff. Or like, have you ever needed a drink in the morning to function? Which I think a lot of people will just focus on that as being an indication of having a drinking problem. I hear that a lot of, well, I don't need to drink every morning, so I'm not an alcoholic, or I don't need to drink every day. And that's not really a clear indicator. It's kind of like, have you had some consequences in relation to your drinking that you don't care for? And that's part of what's really important to me of changing the conversation around treatment, because we have this connotation of like, if you are a gutter alcoholic, if your whole life has fallen apart, then you need to quit drinking forever and you need to go into rehab inpatient. And our program is different. Our program is outpatient, and we prefer the early intervention approach of, are you starting to notice yourself questioning your relationship with drinking? Are you starting to notice some consequences to your drinking? Because I truly believe if we can get in there early enough with a woman and start to examine some of these relational issues and see what's underlying with their stressors and previous traumas in their life, then we could even have a goal eventually of having a healthy relationship with, drinking or whatnot. I don't even like to say like, you have to quit drinking forever if you want treatment. I think it's a big time. It's beyond time that we change the conversation around how this is and start to say, instead of looking at you having a drinking problem, it's, would you benefit from having some additional support in your life? Would you benefit from learning other coping skills with how to manage your stress and, work on yourself without relying on alcohol or other substances?
That's a great thing to touch on, because I just saw that Demi Lovato got criticized pretty heavily for, saying I'm not going to say I'm never drinking again. Like, I'll have a glass of wine here and there. And there was this huge controversy on the internet about whether she was really in recovery or not. And maybe you could speak to that.
Well, I'll just tell you that if I was in treatment and somebody had told me on my way into rehab, like, hey, if you go here, you're going to have to promise you're never going to drink or do anything else for the rest of your life, I would have been like, well, see ya. I'm not going there. Bye. I'm not making that kind of a promise. I don't know of anywhere, any program or any literature that's ever going to say you have to be 100% sober and abstinent for the rest of your life. I don't think that's the best way to get people on board. What I think is the best way is to focus on one day at a time. We do ask that clients remain abstinent when they're in their program with us. For me, when I got into treatment and I started to get this idea that people were going to expect me to stay sober, I kept just kind of like pushing the goal line back a little bit more and a little bit more. And what happened for me is I said, you know what, I'm going to do all this dumb stuff that they're asking me to do, and I'm going to do it 100%, because then when it doesn't work, I'll know it doesn't work and I'll never have to do any of this ever again. But what actually happened for me is my life got so much better, infinitely better, that I opted in and I wanted to keep it going. I said, if it's already gotten this much better in only 1 year, I wonder how much better it can get. And that's just what happened for me. And I have never at any point in my life sworn off alcohol or drugs. But I'm going to be, by the grace of God, if I can make it to June 6th, I will be 10 years sober. And that's been one day at a time. It was never a goal of I'm going to be 10 years sober one day, or I'm going to be sober for the rest of my life. Because I think there's like a rebelliousness in me that if someone had even asked me to do it just on principle alone, I would have been like, nope, that's not going to happen. That's beside the point. The point is we don't need to be authoritarians and tell people how to run their lives. They know what they need. I think when we get too heavy in the trenches with alcohol dominating our lives, there are choices that we are not able to make, including picking up a drink, and our brain does get derailed from being able to utilize our prefrontal cortex where we make these decisions like long-term gratification and or prolonged gratification and choosing right from wrong, those things are hijacked in true addiction. However, if somebody decides that having a substance in their life is something that they want to do after they've been in a treatment program, I don't think our job is to judge or to shame. Our job is to equip them with the skills so that if that becomes problematic for them again, they know what they need to do. So they're not reliant on treatment to be well.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful advice. And I'll start to wrap up a little bit. And I'm so grateful for your time. And actually, that's one of the words that you put in the questionnaire that you really love is gratitude. And how does gratitude play in recovery? And how does it play with women right now that are really struggling, juggling everything that's going on, whether there's homeschooling their kid and they're trying to work and keep everything going? Like, where does gratitude play in your life and in that situation?
Yeah, well, I learned early on in my personal recovery journey that whatever we focus on grows, and that some people even say that addiction is a disease of perspective or perception. And so for me, if I focus on what I'm grateful for, then I end up having more things in my life to be grateful for. And one of the books that I enjoy reading, there's a story that says, when I choose to focus on what's good in a day, I have a good day. If I choose to focus on what's bad in a day, I have a bad day. If I focus on the problem increases. And if I focus on the solution increases. So to me, gratitude is everything. And, for many people, I try to encourage them to look at all the things that they have, and that there probably are a lot of things in our lives that we were wishing for at some point in time.
Thank you for joining us today on Heidi's Colorful Colorado. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And definitely follow me on Instagram to keep up with my latest adventures. In the meantime, happy trails from me, Heidi Ganahl.